All right. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Dave. Dave, if you could introduce yourself and your farm and other work you do with flame weeding, and then maybe talk a little bit about your general approaches with weed management in your organic grain rotations, and particularly touch on the flame weeder. That would be great.
Yeah, my name's David Yoder. I'm in CB West Central Missouri. We're just south of Kansas City, about 30 minutes. A little history about where I came from. I grew up on a hog and sheep farm. And then about 98, when hogs kind of crashed, that went away. And I went to the city, worked construction for a few years, and then come back to the farm. I started working for Big Yield. We sell a lot of growth enhancing products, a lot of liquid fertilizers, that sort of things. And then we've got a full organic line also. And then we started dealing in Red Dragon flame weeders. Um, and that's really where I got my start in organic farming, was here on the research farm for Big Yield. We did a lot of independent research for different companies. We work with different universities: MU, K State, Arkansas, Lincoln University there in Jeff City, Missouri. Um, did a lot of research. We partnered with them and did some research for them. They did some research for us, that sort of thing. Uh, so that's kind of how I got my start. We wanted to transition the research farm into some organic production. So that's not something I really wanted to get into, but I was kind of thrust into it, and I started transitioning acres here. Um, and over that 3 or 5 year process, Dad decided he was ready to retire or step back. And so, to make it feasible for us to take over the farm acres, we had to do something that was more profitable. So we decided to go organic on our personal farm as well. And so right now, I think we're sitting at around 450, 500 acres that's certified organic. And that's kind of where we're at now. And it's a little bit of my history. But like I said, with Big Yield is where I got my start with burners, and even, using equipment that my grandpa used, as far as the roll cultivators and rotary hoes and things like that. We got in. I learned a lot about those, how to set them. A lot of that equipment, and then the flame weeders. We thought we needed something else to help us with weed control, and the flame weeders was one way we went. And so that's how I kind of got my start in those. We've been using those for about 7 years now, probably. Really like the way they work. Uh, Depending on price of propane, they're fairly reasonable to run also. Especially if you compare to prices of chemicals right now. Roundup, I think the last bid I saw for some Roundup was about $70 a gallon. So if you compare our propane price to that, it's still cheaper to run a flamer through your corn and beans. So, but when we started using the burners, the main focus on those was the corn production side. That's where we had a lot of research, and we had a lot of guys telling us we could do that on the corn side. So that's what we did. And then we thought, well, you know what? Let's try them on the soybean side. So then we started using them on our soybeans as well. Um, we are a dealer for Red Dragon, so we do sell them, and I get a lot of questions about those, and I can kind of run you through a little bit of how we use them. Kind of our theory. A lot of it goes back to Mother Nature and what Mother Nature is going to allow us to do. And I think that's big in the organic production, is Mother Nature with rain or drought or whatever problems that you face. So specifically on corn, we'll hit corn a couple different stages. We will burn early, at that right through its right when it's spiking through the ground to about the fifth leaf, and then we'll hold off a little bit until it's about knee high. Then we'll start burning hot and heavy again. Um, oh, another thing I wanted to add, we are using two different types of burners. We have our row burners. I think everybody's pretty familiar with those. And then we have like a broadcast burner that is it's a total burn. So the torches are faced a little differently, and it gives you a full coverage so it doesn't go down the rows. And we'll use that one on corn early also, just to kind of burn everything and kind of sterilize that seed bed when the corn's coming through. Give us a good jump start on our weed control. But then we'll burn corn, all the way up to till we can't get over it anymore. And a lot of times, if we can time it right, we'll just burn once a year. Sometimes we burn twice a year. It just depends on, what rains we're having, what weed pressures we have, um, or that sort of thing. On soybeans, a lot of guys are scared to burn soybeans, and we're having really good luck with it. I actually have a guy, he's burning soybeans right at the second trifoliate. He's coming through and burning those beans when those beans are about, what is that, 4 to 6 inches tall, somewhere in there. Having really good luck with that. He's running 50 pounds of propane and running 5 miles an hour. He's getting really good results from that. Typically, I like to tell people that window is so small. If you're before that or right after that, you're going to kill a lot of beans. Um, Typically, what I tell people is wait till beans are about knee high, and then we'll start burning them, and we'll burn beans all the way up into pod set, all the way through flower. We did some research here on the research farm with that on soybeans. We burned beans, that were in flower, and really didn't see any sort of yield drag whatsoever. And it's been pretty neat. I almost think we're getting yield bumps from stressing those soybeans some. Beans like the stress. That's something when we were conventional farming, we would hit them with Cobra or something early and just burn the snot out of them. And I think we're kind of doing the same thing. We're just doing it in a more friendly way.
Have you
Which
noticed that they branch more? I know with beans being stressed and some practices like rolling, there's some evidence that they branch more, and that's one of the reasons why you tend to see some of that uh,
right.
increased yields.
Yeah, I think it helps with your nodule spacing, getting those closer together, and I think it damages foliage, the foliage on the plant. And I've read a couple studies where they're saying we have too much foliage on our plants now. So if you can get that bean to quit trying to grow tall and start bushing out and worrying about flowering and setting pods, filling pods, you're going to do yourself a favor there with that.
There's a
Um,
question in the chat about if you blind or row cultivate with the burning, or how do you kind of integrate burning with other cultivation, mechanical cultivation methods?
so if we can, we'll wait to burn corn and beans until they're about knee high. Um, most of the time we're still running rotary hose here. We're looking at tine weeders. It's a piece of equipment we need to get, but we haven't bought yet. Um, but we still rotary hoe, and then we'll first pass cultivate. I think Rusty's going to touch on that a little bit, the guidance system and some more of that. What we like to do is me and my brother will go out there and we'll spend, you know, 2 hours, half a day setting a cultivator, and we get these things set where we're running 5 mile an hour on our first pass. It takes a lot of time. We run rolling shields with either a 3 or a 5 tine, Danish tine type cultivator is what we're using. uh, so we'll rotary hoe, we'll first pass cultivate, and then we'll come back and burn. It just kind of depends, like I said, on what Mother Nature is allowing us to do. That's going to be our most um, typical program that we're going to run. We're going to rotary hoe, cultivate, and then we'll come in and burn when we're about knee high. And it makes it nice. Sometimes we burn early. It just depends on whether we've got rains and it's too muddy to cultivate or something. Then we could get in the field with a burner if we've got a problem somewhere. But
So, what are the
that's
stages of corn and soybean that you can run the flame weeder? Are there certain stages where it's just too
up to
difficult?
the fifth leaf on your corn. Your growing point's still under the ground, so you're good to burn corn up to that fifth leaf coming out. And then once it's knee high, once you can kind of get underneath the top of the plant, you're good. And same with the soybeans. Um, uh, I do have guys that you can burn in that cotyledon stage right as it's coming through the ground before it splits open, before that seed splits open. You can burn there; it won't kill the plant. Yeah, this right as the second trifoliate is just starting to bud out. I mean, just a eighth of an inch or a 16th of an inch. You can get in and burn those beans there. I have a guy doing that, having really good success with that. Uh, and then of course wait till they're about knee high then, and you can get your torch heads underneath the top of the plant. The top of the plant, your growing point is what you don't want to burn. Now that's where we're still using our rotary hose and cultivators to keep our weeds small, because if your weeds are the same height as your bean or your corn, then you're not going to have very good success killing them with a burner. Um, that's kind of the stages that we run, and that's what tends to work for us. About knee high is where that's where I personally start really burning a lot, and hitting it hard with the burner.
So, are the burners both getting the in row weeds and the between row weeds then? Or is that a difference between the broadcast burners
The,
versus the in row burners?
right, the in row burners is what I'm calling the row crop, and those
Okay.
are getting the weeds in the row. In between the row, that's where our broadcast burner will work, and we use that early in the spring on corn and on the beans. If we may use it pre-plant or just follow the planter with it, to kind of sterilize that seed bed a little bit. Um, that's kind of how we use those. We use those in the fall also. Those broadcast burners we pull behind the right after the combine, kind of killing the germination and weed seed that the combine has spread out.
Hmm.
Uh, we've seen some successes with that. Uh, we'll pull that over and then spread our litter or whatever we're going to do, and do our field work after that, after we've burned there in the fall. But that's most generally how we try to approach things. But I think, like I say, I, the burners make it easy. I don't want to say that because organic farming is not easy, but it's just one of those tools. I feel like it benefits us a lot. I sold one to a guy in Illinois, I think, here a couple of years ago, and I called him that next fall and I said, "Well, how'd your burner go?" And he said, "Well, we never used it. We never had to." I said, "Well, good. Ideally, that's the ideal situation where you don't have to, you can go out and rotary hoe and cultivate 2 times and be done. Ideally, that's where you want to be in organic farming, but a lot of times that doesn't work that way. So,
Yeah, I mean, that's a case with some equipment, and there's some years you may use it, there's some years it may just be sitting in the shed. And yeah, to have those tools available to be able to deal with what Mother Nature throws at you a given year is important when it comes to organic. There's another question in the chat about um, burning and its effectiveness with thistles, or maybe commenting on if there strategies with the burner to that are specific for perennial weeds. Quackgrass is one I always struggle with.
any of your broadleafs is going to set back really well. Um, Perennials, they tend to come back. We we typically we kill all our thistle that we have around here. One one weed, or that's a grass, foxtail, or any of your grasses, where your growing point is underground, you're not going to kill with a burner. Um, what we do if we have a grass problem, and this goes back to how we run them some. If we have a grass problem, what we'll do is we will burn first and then cultivate after we burn. And what that's done is we burn that grass off to the ground and then we'll bury it. And we've had really good success controlling the grass problems that way. If a broadleaf problem, we'll typically, if we're going to cultivate, we'll cultivate first and then we'll come back and burn after that. And those broadleaves are easier to kill that way. So burying that grass or burying that perennial like that may benefit you. You may want to burn and then cultivate afterwards.
All right.
Dave, do you mind if I jump in for a second?
No, go ahead.
It's funny. I was writing down notes what I want to talk about, and that was one of them, especially with broadleaves. The flaming process, in my experience, what I'm learning and just in studying, and that's how Dave and I met, was through the flaming. I bought a Red Dragon system and put it together, and the company directed me to Dave for questions, and he's been real helpful. But the one thing I learned is flaming is a lot like using glyphosate in a way, because the way you're killing the plant, you're basically ending its process of life and closing the stomates down or whatever. But if you're going out with chemical and you try to spray chemical too late and the weed is too big, it's going to laugh at you and come back stronger. And the flame will do the same thing. Everything has to be done timely. I talked to a guy that he was all gung ho. He was going to build a flamer on a highboy or a big John Deere sprayer. And he thought he was going to go out and flame in high crop stages when the weeds were 3 feet tall in his corn. And it's like, well, you can waste your money if you want to, but you're not going to do anything other than burn a few tips off, and it's just going to keep growing. So this is just like conventional farming. It has to be done timely, or it's, if you think you're going to get away with it just because you got a flamer, and you can come back and save it, there's no saving it. You have to be timely, you have to be proactive, and you got to get in gear early. And these tools will work. They are effective, but you have to be timely.
So there's another question in the chat, if any special shielding or heat placement with flame weeding is needed for soybeans.
We don't use any on any of our flaming equipment. There are some out there, the AFIs. I think Paul Hunefeld, he's building one. It's got shields on it. We don't see the benefit to them, and we don't see that they're needed. We are wanting, on soybeans, we are wanting to stress the plant. That's part of my thinking on burning soybeans and even growing soybeans. I want to stress it. I want to make it work for what it's doing, and make it think about producing fruit, not producing, stem. So I think the shields on soybeans might actually hurt you more than they help you. That's kind of my thought behind it. And I've seen, with the shielded burners, they're using about the same amount of propane we are. So I haven't seen any benefit from the shields, really. We're burning 7 to 10 gallon per acre on our row crop flamers. That's kind of where we've been, just depending on weed size and temperature outside and how fast we want to drive. And the shielded flamers burners, they're burning the same amount of propane. So that's kind of my take on the shields. Some guys like them, some guys don't. It just, it's like Rusty said, it's all about timing, and it all depends so much on Mother Nature and what she's going to let you do. And just everybody does it a little different. And it's so interesting to get on these type of Zoom meetings and go to conferences and see how everybody does it different. And what works for me may not work for you. But, that's kind of my take on the shields. And I think timing's probably really important, more than shields or anything like that would be.
If I may, the one thing on shields that they could be a benefit, especially if you're leaning toward no-till or minimum tillage in your organic crop. The shields do direct the heat down into the middle of the row, I think is what they're designed for, actually, is to keep the heat centered down there, where the system we're using is putting it out where we can't get with the cultivator up close to the base of the plant. and those shields can be effective in that respect. But a lot of time you've got so much organic matter and dead. If you got a cover crop that's decaying or whatever in there, you gotta be careful. You might catch your whole field on fire too. So there's setbacks to that as well. But the shields have their place. And like David and I's operation, they really don't serve a purpose, I guess. And we're more trying to direct the flame at the growing point of the weed is our objective with that flame. So that works better in our operations, where we're going to come back in with in season tillage to take care of what's in the row and be more effective that way.
So maybe more of just a general weed management question for either of you, or for folks too that have some advice, if you want to put it in the chat. Just generally about thistle management. If maybe flame weeders aren't the best tool, but are there other strategies that you use to manage thistles if you see them in the field? I know we've had to take some fields out of production and do some intensive cover cropping for a year, usually with sorghum Sudan grass, and just keep chopping that. So basically, kind of sacrificing a crop on for a year. The sorghum Sudan tends to stress it somewhat, and that continued cutting ends up depleting some of the nutrient reserves and the underground structures that allow it to be a perennial plant. So that's been our strategy on the land that we manage. Is yeah, unfortunately, if we get too high of a pressure, basically means a year out of production. But yeah, what are your guys' strategies with thistles?
We don't have a lot of thistle problem here. That's another thing. It's interesting about organic farming. It seems like everybody's figuring out which region you're at is your weed problems. But most of ours is like shatter cane, cuckleburr, that sort of thing. Shatter cane it will keep coming back. So that's something we do too. We may take a field out of production if we have too big of a problem, but maybe even clipping it. I don't know. I saw Rusty last year. He built a clipper, but those things are out there. They're available. I don't know if something like that would work on thistle or and like I said, if you can burn it and then bury it, it may stun it enough. And that's one thing I've noticed, that after we burn, I did a field one year. I split the field in half, a little 7-acre field on the research farm. We burned half of it, and half of it we left, and just did our typical cultivation practices on it. Where we did burn, the weeds that were there that were left were only knee high, and this was in mature corn that was ready to harvest. Where we did not burn, the weeds, so your water hemp, your cuckleburrs, the shatter cane, was as tall as the corn. So it's like the burning, it may not have killed it, but it stunted it enough that it was not competing with the corn crop.
Rusty, any thoughts about thistle? Is that something that you have
We
to deal
don't
with?
fight thistles real heavy here, but we have some cocklebur issues and stuff like that. And I will even, part of my strategy moving forward here is zoning fields. So we've got a couple fields in it. My rotation plan right now is corn, oats, soybeans, and so you've got a solid crop going in ahead of your soybean crop to mitigate weed pressure. And I don't have a problem, putting oats out even in a place where I was planning on raising corn if I had a real heavy weed stress area. Just getting that solid stand of oats out there, even throwing a little bit of alfalfa with it or something like that, or any kind of a solid seeded crop. The beauty part of that, especially if you're going into alfalfa, is you're clipping that every month or whatever. And otherwise, in your oats, you're gonna go out and clip your oats in July, and whatever weed pressure is there is going to get clipped off before it produces a viable seed head. So I guess I value those solid stand crops instead of taking them completely out of production. If you could generate revenue off of an oat crop or peas or something of a solid stand crop, that's a nice way to mitigate some weed pressure there and keep it at bay. And work toward, I guess. And my operation, corn is king. Corn is always my major cash crop, and if I can get a corn crop every 3 years, um, I really value that. The My yields, just going through my operations center with my John Deere operations center today, looking at some of our yields, phenomenal yield differences between soybeans going to corn and oats going to corn. My oats were 20 to 30 bushel better. My cornfields following oats. So there's just a lot of value in putting all that green back in the ground. So and mitigating that weed pressure. So I guess I put a lot of value in that.
That's interesting. I mean, oftentimes we discourage oats after corn because of disease issues, but you haven't seen that as
I
a.
haven't really noticed that. No, I had one with the company that I work with, AgriSecure. They said, "Oh, you should just you've got enough hog manure. You should just do corn oats, corn oats, corn oats." And I was like, "No, I don't think we want to do that. We
Yeah.
will end up with issues." But
Yeah.
I just like following. I like to have a solid stand in front of soybeans just because the weed pressure is so much less. I mean, it really works well.
Oh,
So
interesting.
so far, it like you said, there's no right or wrong answer in
Yeah.
organics. It might blow up your face too. It's
And it
just
might change even on the same farm. It could change as the
correct.
rotation matures and yeah, it's you're
Yeah.
always on your toes, that's for sure.
Mhm.
So another question, because of fire risk, do you store the burner with the propane tank inside a tight shed?
Ours, we actually dual purpose ours. It actually sits outside of our shop, and then in the wintertime, we hook our shop heat up to that tank. Um, so no, I haven't seen any risk. Some of that, as I've sold these, I think the state of New Mexico was about the hardest to get along with as far as some of their regulations and rules that they wanted to see. Some stainless steel lines and some things like that they wanted added on to make these things legal to use in the state of New Mexico. But it is propane. It can be dangerous. These are a complete liquid system too, so you're pulling off the liquid side of your tank, which um, that no different really than pulling off the gas side. But uh, I mean, you need to be careful with it and respect it for sure. We've dealt with propane our whole lives. Like I said, growing up on the hog farm, we heated hog barns with propane heaters. I've always, when we had a couple propane tractors we were filling, on the farm, using those. We used those for a couple of years, but I, I haven't had any problems with storing propane safely. It's a safe tank. It's an actual propane tank is what we use on them.
So
I
another,
would
oh,
I
go ahead,
would
Rusty.
encourage not to store a propane tank indoors, but I mean, if it's a secure tank, it shouldn't be a problem. But a propane tank belongs outdoors, so I guess for safety reasons. But I wouldn't put it in a shed. So some people probably do. I wouldn't.
So a question related to that fall burning, how fast and what PSI behind the combine do you run the burner, and what is the metric to watch behind the combine? Is there a risk of fire, and how long after combining?
Um, Typically, the day after we're done combining, and we most generally just do this on like our bean ground, our bean stubble. Uh, it generally doesn't burn too much. If you think you may have a problem, what we've done in the past is run a guy around the field, or we'll make a pass all the way around the field, and then we'll have a guy following us in a gator or four wheeler with a leaf blower and a tank of water, to kind of blow the fires out if there is any. But typically, the soybean field won't burn really at all. Cornfields, they'll flare up some, but more smoke than anything. But usually, there's enough moisture left in the beanstalk that there's no real fire hazard. It's not like burning a wheat field off. Um, and we're run, just depending on where we're at, where we know the weedy spots are, we'll run 7 mile an hour. If we know we got a really weedy spot here, we need to hit it pretty hard, we may slow down to 3 or 4 mile an hour, something like that. But typically we're running that, I'd say probably average 5 mile an hour is what we're running. That broadcast burner, it does burn quite a bit more propane. It burns 15 to 20 gallon per acre. And I think we're running 75, 80 pounds of pressure on that broadcast burner. The torch heads on it are actually bigger than what we're running on our row crop flamer. Our row crop flamers, they're, I think, what are they, 500 and 650,000 BTU, something like that. And our broadcast burner, they're 1.2 million BTU torch heads. So they're putting out quite a bit more heat, so we can usually speed those up a little bit. But we're also watching our ambient temperatures, our temperatures too. If it's super cold, we'll slow down. In the fall, you never know what you're going to run into. So, but no, we haven't had any problems with fires, and we'll usually run, the day after the combine is out of the field. So that's generally what we do.
So that is it for the chat for now. I don't know if you if I probably screwed up your flow, Dave, but I don't know if you have any more thoughts to share on the flamer or the burner, how you use it, or any other weed management tips and tricks that you do on your farm.
Yeah, like I said, it's all going to vary from person to person how they use it. I can tell you how we do it. Odds are you'll end up doing it differently, just depending on where you're at and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. We do have a bunch of videos on our website, bigyield.us, that you can log on there and search through videos, burner videos, and find those. And like I said, if you guys want to get a hold of me, I'm kind of an open book. I'm willing to share what I know. So you get a hold of me and call me if you got any questions, or if you want to buy a burner, let me know.
So bigyield.us is the website. I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Rusty, we'll pass it to you to tell us you talked a little bit about your rotation, but some about your farm, how many acres you're running, and just some of your history, what you're doing. And I know you're doing some pretty innovative stuff with respect to weed management.
Oh, we always try something new, and 7 times out of 10 it doesn't work, but we're getting better. So we farm in north central Iowa. There is not a lot of organics in our area. You go about 50 miles to the west of us. There is a lot of organic operations over there, actually. So it's kind of nice. I do have a little bit of network. I was actually on the phone with 2 other organic farmers this morning from over west. We're actually working on some tillage strategy for this for in season with RTK and moving in that direction. So I see a lot of value in that. We currently farm just around 1,400 acres. We've downsized our operation significantly since we started doing organics. And the neat thing going through the numbers, it's cash flow season, and it's a lot of fun to see that our gross revenue is going down and net revenue is going up. So it's fun to see those kind of numbers. We about 900 acres conventional ground. I've got 250 acres currently in transition. I got another 250 acres that's certified organic. And our long-term goal is my wife and I own about 800 acres, and our long-term goal is to have every acre organic. So we could keep renting some more ground. I'm cautious about transitioning rented ground into organics unless it's close and we've got a very good relationship with the landowner. You hate to put all that work in to not have it someday or something goes wrong. So, but got into this through a company called AgriSecure. They've been very helpful in the paperwork and the whole process, and it allows me the opportunity to just farm. And I've got somebody in my corner that takes care of the documents and making sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. So I appreciate working with those kind of people. But so yeah, we've done some, tried some cool things. Like I said, spent a lot of time focusing on my rotation. We have access to a lot of hog manure, and that was one of my driving forces to get into this, because we've got all this organic fertilizer, if you will, and our fertility levels in our ground are very good. We produced some, in my transition years, produced some fabulous corn yields, soybean yields, oats and alfalfa. Everything has been pretty good for us so far. So it's fun to see those numbers. And but the further you get into it, the more, if staying on top of weed pressure was getting to be an issue, and that's where people like David came in and really helped guide me in the right direction. So started to see value in getting more tools in your toolbox, and hopefully not having to use them all the time. So always have things at your disposal, but you need to try to limit your passes so you keep your return your investment up where you want it. But I guess walk you through a typical process of, say, like I'm going to raise an 80-acre field of corn. I start out with my, of course, we'll have fall tillage, whether it's V-ripped or moldboard plowed, or I like V-ripping. I like to keep residue on top. Wind erosion is always a concern. We field cultivate in the spring, and we'll put our hog manure down either in the fall or the spring. We'll field cultivate in the spring. We use the tine weeder as our weed management tool until the corn starts to emerge, and we'll actually keep using the weed timer. My goal is to be in that field every 3 to 4 days with something and mitigating weed pressure. So we probably stir a little more dirt than we should, but we're also working on incorporating some cover crops in. We're trying to learn how to do that, and love to talk to people that are doing that. So but anyway, rotary hoe, do a little bit of that. I don't see as much effectiveness of that as since I bought the weed tiner. The weed tiner kind of put the rotary hoe back in the shed. That is a fabulous tool, and I've got some really cool videos of that, but unfortunately I can't get them all to upload right now. So but if you've been around them, they work fabulous. They do a great job. Then we move in with, I've got 2 different cultivation in-row cultivators I use. I use a like a Danish tine or a John Deere 3-sweep cultivator. And like David and his brother do, we spend a lot of time setting that cultivator, getting the guards in the right place, and making sure that we can maintain a speed that's, both economical to run and more effective. The more dirt that you can burn out close to your base of your plant as possible to be covering up weed pressure makes a big difference on how your crop's going to turn out and what your field's going to look like after you harvest. We'll run that typically 2 times, and then we move to our high speed. I've got a Henniker 5000 single sweep cultivator on, I think they're 18-inch sweeps on that. Spending the money on tillage equipment that's not worn out is a must. Don't buy it just because it's cheap, doesn't make it good. You've got to spend the money and keep your stuff in good, your equipment in good condition, and make sure you've got good points on there. Good points are everything for moving dirt. And so we'll run that high speed typically up till we can't hardly drive the tractor through the field anymore. And I've got videos of our cornfields. The weed pressure was phenomenal. Working with Dave on learning how to use our flamer. Like I said before, the key to flaming is, in my estimation, what I'm learning is timing. Timing is everything. It's just like spraying chemicals. If you think you're going to go out and do a rescue mission with chemicals, whether it's in corn or soybeans, you come back and you burn your beans with whatever those burner bean products we used to spray. I don't remember what they're called now. You might sting it a little bit, but it's not going to kill it. It's just it still might produce viable seed to grow back next year. So if you can get that weed when it's that small, you can burn it off and it's just non-existent. And be effective with your timing and get out and flame while your growing point's still below the ground. I love listening to what Dave says about burning soybeans. I'm scared to death of it, but I know they're making it work, and I'm trying to follow Dave and his crew down there to see how they're doing it, because beans are the tough crop to raise. A lot of people in my corner with AgriSecure, they don't even want to raise them anymore. They just have fought weed pressure so hard, but there's some success stories out there, and it's a phenomenal crop. It does so much for the soil and putting nitrogen, but natural nitrogen back into the soil, and setting you up for a nice crop of oats or alfalfa, or if you want to grow peas or something like that. It's, it's just a great crop to, get into a 3 or 4 year rotation with. So I like to see innovative ideas. Um, so our, like I said, we do the time, we use the weed tiner, a little bit of rotary hoe, cultivating, get the flaming in there. I like to cultivate, flame, then cultivate again with the 3 sweep, and then come in with my high speed and hopefully just do that once. I've done it twice in some issue areas, but a lot of fun, a lot of learning, burning a lot of diesel fuel, trying to figure out what's working and what we can eliminate doing. So one thing we did do on soybeans, I know Aaron mentioned it, or David mentioned it. I was trying to get somebody to come in and zap. I have not been around. One thing I'm learning about zapping is they are fairly effective on broadleaf control, on grasses, just like anything else, hard to kill. The zappers will sting it, but it just doesn't make it go away. And the thing about zapping is you got to remember your weed pressure you have to have it above the canopy, or it's not going to do anything. And so it's a timing issue. By the time you get to the point where you can actually go out and zap, your weeds are getting so big that it's almost too late. And a friend of mine that I met through Facebook, he's down in Missouri. He pretty much lives in a zapper tractor all summer long. They got a large operation, several thousand acres, and he spends all summer in that zapper. And they do have very nice bean fields, and their yields are very good, but they are pass after pass, 3, 4 passes of the cultivator, and then zapping and zapping and zapping, and it's a never-ending process. So I'm anxious to come up with other ideas, whether via cover crops or whatever we can do to get in there to mitigate this weed pressure. That's what we need to have these group conversations for. But
Yeah,
we
and if
did
anyone
build.
has any, sorry, Rusty, if anyone has any experiences with the weed zapper, definitely put that in the chat because I know I definitely wanted to touch on that because that's something a lot of people have their
Raise your hand and unmute if you can.
yeah, and also feel free to unmute too if anyone has experience. I mean, we tried it this is our first year trying it. We did some soybeans and we had kind of a weird year this year, as I think many people did. Maybe every year is weird. So I know that some of you might be familiar with our work of using spring seeded cereal rye interseeded into soybeans as a weed suppression technique. And Jack Arisman from Illinois, he's a longtime organic farmer that does that pretty routinely. He says like 4 out of 5 times it works great, and then that fifth time doesn't work so great. Great being a relative term, I guess. But this year we had such a dry spring. What I think happened is usually we do some stale seed bedding and go through and try to get a flush of weeds and then knock it back down with like a field cultivator and then come in and plant. But because it didn't rain, we didn't get any of those weeds germinated. So when that rain came, it was after we planted the soybeans and the rye, and we had a huge flush of weeds. So we had a weedy mess. And then we worked to have someone come in on contract and do the weed zapper. But just like Dave and Rusty are saying, in organic, hitting things at the right stage, particularly early enough, is critical. And what we found was that we hit those weeds too late. I mean, there just wasn't enough water content in the stem, and we definitely saw singed tops to the weeds, but it certainly didn't kill them. So they were still shading the soybeans, and there were still viable weed seeds. So one of the things we learned was even with the weed zapper, just like any tool in organic, there's limitations in terms of when you can go out there. It certainly won't work at every weed stage, and like Rusty's saying, there's certain weeds where it does work, and certain weeds where it doesn't work. Weeds that have a higher water content, particularly some of those annual broadleaves, seem to works pretty well. I know people have had success with giant ragweed, but again, even there, I think there could be a timing issue as well. And too, it's like Rusty said, I mean, you're waiting until the weeds get over the canopy, and that's they're already probably your soybean crop's already taken a hit there, but it potentially could help with decreasing the weed seed bank in subsequent years. But definitely I wouldn't, I mean, it's one of those cleanup tools, and it's great to have, but I wouldn't rely on it as being like a central part of your weed management strategy. Any folks
Aaron,
have experience? Feel free to unmute too, and with your experiences with the weed zapper. But go ahead, Rusty. Sorry.
I was going to say, I've got a video on here. I was going to, if you can allow me to show my screen for just a second here. I'm not
Yeah,
sure. This was something we came up with, and I know David said there's somebody building these now, which is awesome. But
I
I
think
was
you
trying
should
to.
be able to share your screen. If you press the button, does that the green share screen button? Does that work?
Let me. Where would I find that? I thought I had to be. Oh, here it is. Okay, I got it. Screen one. I don't want screen two. Oh, I could share screen two. There we go. One second. Um, where that's at. I'll just share screen one. So you're gonna see. Sure. Here we go. Okay. So what I've got here is this was something we had a old John Deere 220 bean platform that trees growing with out in the grove. We had a bean field that just I had a crew of walkers lined up to come and walk my soybeans, and through all the all the COVID issues and everything, we couldn't get our crew on time. They couldn't get up here, and I just couldn't handle looking at this bean field anymore. There wasn't a lot of grass pressure, but I was getting button weeds and just a lot of broadleaf coming up over the canopy. And I just thought, just wait, figure out a way to cut those off. So I took this old bean platform, I mounted on the front of a tractor, and it actually worked really well. I ran hydraulic lines, everything, replaced everything with orbit motors, and it what we're doing here is we're just clipping like mostly broadleaf velvet leaf. The velvet leaf was already producing a seed, but it wasn't a viable seed. It was just green and mushy. So we're cutting it off. I cut the whole pan out of the bottom of that bean platform, hung it on the front of my tractor on the loader, and it just made it look like a regular bean field. And the neat thing was the stem was still there, but the viable seed was clipped off. I did this twice in the growing season in August. So the ones that I couldn't quite get that were just coming through, they came up a little bit later. And I'll be honest with you, these beans did phenomenal, and they were very clean. And of course, we got what was in the row.
They look
Uh,
pretty awesome even without the clipping, to be honest.
the beans were good beans. We had good luck. Now you get the bomb side. One thing that I can tell you that everybody likes to do, they think that it's really. How do I unshare my screen now here?
Um, I
I'm
think
gonna have to,
you can, if you press the share screen again, I think you can
oh my,
get off
I
of
gotta
it.
make this bigger. I just need to
Kind of, I'll
go
pipe in
ahead.
on these clippers here a little bit. What we did is we actually just used personally, we had some Chattercade problems, and we did the same thing. It was starting to put on a head, so we went in and clipped it, and I think we eliminated a lot of viable seed. And what we used was just your typical hay mower, 3-point disc mower. Uh, and the only problem is it's not wide enough. We could only take 3 rows at a time. But where we had problems, we really, really cleaned up the field and made it a lot easier to combine. Um, there is a guy here just south of us, 30 minutes. He's actually building those like what you built, Rusty.
Mhm.
He's taken old grain platforms and converting them over. And if anybody's interested or anything, I can probably get him in touch with that guy. His name's Elston Dirks.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
He's down at Butler, Missouri, and he's actually building and selling those. He'll paint them any color you want, and then make them to where they're like quick attach onto your front end loader or whatever you need.
Is it okay if I put your email in the chat, Dave?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. We've gone over some of our soybean fields, not at a real mature stage, but it's been more to clean up organic no-till fields, just with a batwing mower to clean up the fields. Yeah, I think that developing tools like that is a great option, particularly if you're looking at reducing viable weed seed for the next year.
There is a Italian company, and they are making just a regular like a weed clipper. That's what we're looking at
Hmm.
getting, and you can get them up to I think 60 feet wide.
Yeah.
And they're 3-point mounted either to the front 3-point or back 3-point. They take little hydraulic motors to run. I'm not sure. Montezuma or something is the name of the brand. I'm not real sure. But that's what we're looking into. Usually, your dealer for your like your Einbach cultivators, they'll usually have a connection to them European companies where they can get you one possibly. But that's kind of what we're looking at, and I think the clippers, more than the weed zappers, are going to be a good way to control weeds and make things work.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like there's some other options too for in-row mowers that might be good tools for soybean production. Um, there's a question in the chat, Rusty. I don't know if you can talk more about this. I know it's always a hot topic on the O-Grain listserv about experience with guidance systems, camera, sonic, etc. It sounds like you may have just been talking about that this morning a
Mhm.
bit.
Yeah, this it's basically starting to consume my half of my week here working on this. Well, back the story up. We also do our own tiling with a tile plow, and we've been running the laser setup. And with my new tile plow, I wanted to move into RTK. It's just faster, easier, more consistent, and can move around faster. But anyway, trying to figure out how to incorporate this in. We've been planting with what they call RTX, which is a kind of a downgrade from RTK, and it's great, but it's not accurate enough to follow up with RTK row crop cultivation. And so what we did, we ended up buying 2 John Deere globes that have the radios and the RTK subscriptions on them, and we'll have a base station, and we're gonna plant with that, and then we can follow back with the row crop cultivation just to be more accurate, more timely, less operator fatigue. And if you know anything about cultivating, it's just a tiring job. So if you're trying to hold it on the road, especially get some side hills and stuff, but I really see value in it. The other thing we're doing is going back to the good old 1980s and 1990s technology of row guidance for a cultivator with the whiskers, and they work wonderful. There is some awesome technology with the cameras and the sensors that will do all that for you, but the old whisker systems, they're very effective, and you can pick them up at an auction for a couple $1,000, and they do work really well. If you couple that with RTK, you can do a phenomenal job of cultivating and lose very little crops. So the other thing we're trying to figure out is if we're going with track tractors versus wheel type tractors. Is a big debate on who's running down more crops in the end rows and the turns, and a lot of that depends on if you're running a 24-row cultivator or a 12-row cultivator on the wheels versus tracks, or you're running your duals or you're taking your duals off. And it's became kind of this whole Facebook. You've had people calling me from my Facebook posts and talking to me personally and giving me their experiences. So it's I see a lot of value in it. If you can justify it and figure out a way to make it work in your farm, it will pay. The biggest ROI I can see on my farm are three things I have that I consider my highest ROI. One is my grain dryer setup. Two is the just utilizing the technology, and three is having up-to-date track, not trying to run old equipment that's broke down half the time. So that's where I see my highest ROI is in efficiency. So I always look for opportunities to improve.
So I think, yeah, there's some other comments in the chat, but that looks like it's it for questions. Any other tips or tricks or things you've learned with managing weeds on your farm?
Well, if you ask my neighbors, they say, "Oh, he just sprays at night."
Again, that soybean field looked awful clean, even though you were critical of it. That looked pretty
Yeah,
amazing to me.
I think my wife thought I lived in that field this summer. So
One thing I heard from a Iowa farmer, thought he was in Northeast Iowa, it was for soybeans. I mean, similar to what you were saying, Rusty, having that solid stand. I mean, oftentimes I think we kind of get locked into the mindset of more of a standard rotation: corn, beans, small grain, alfalfa. But one thing he did to mix it up a little bit, and I know that there necessarily isn't easy markets for alfalfa for everyone. And although so Bryce Earlbeck from AgriSecure, he is talking at a couple of these workshops. I think even maybe the next next one that we have
I
scheduled.
I just got off the phone with Bryce, actually.
Bryce is an
So
amazing farmer
great guy.
himself and always has great tips and thoughts as well. And I know Bryce has alfalfa as a cornerstone of his rotation and sells the alfalfa in the conventional market. But when you again, concentrating on our ROI, like you're saying, Rusty, he still finds value to it. But anyway, this example with soybeans was that it may have even been an example with organic no-till soybeans. This makes a ton of sense to me. But he was doing corn into alfalfa and then into soybeans and was finding that that was really helpful for clean beans and that there was still end credit that benefited the corn. So kind of mixing it up a little bit, and beans are just they're hard in organic. So when you're going from a 30-inch row crop to another 30-inch row crop, if you can break it up there with some solid seeded crop, that does seem to help with respect to weed management in your bean crop. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way of
Did
kind of
you say
shaping.
he did, he followed the corn with alfalfa, or how did you say?
Yeah, corn, alfalfa, and then beans. But I thought he
Okay,
was even
makes
doing
sense.
organic no. Yeah. I thought that was I hadn't thought of doing that, but and then
Mhm.
if you're doing organic no-till beans, you can come in. You might have to sacrifice the last cutting of alfalfa, I guess, but you could get that rye in early enough and then crimp it, and you're setting yourself up for a really clean bean crop.
Hmm.
Um, so we have a comment from Aaron that they've used the Deer RTK coupled with Buffalo One guidance for several years, and that's worked well. So I mean, that's similar to what you were just saying, Rusty, right?
Yeah, same
Yeah.
same setup. Yep.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
we do have a guy locally. He is running RTK, and he does cultivate behind planting with it. He's having success with it. He does. I think he's running 8 row equipment. He takes his duals off. You said something about inrows there for a little bit. We actually don't plant inrows anymore. We
I'm
got
this
in with
close, Steve. This close.
we. I mean, we got in with NRCS. They offer programs. You could put field borders on, and they'll pay you to do it. If you could utilize some of those programs. We don't. We only put field borders where we know we're going to have inrows.
Mhm.
So the field border does not go all the way around the field. It's just on the two ends where our end rows would typically be. Um, and that's typically worked well for us. And they, locally for us, they have good programs to where if we wanted to, we could actually make hay on those with the NRCS office or the extension office or whoever whatever their acronyms are. But that's what we've done. Is just eliminated some of those where we were having problems.
My daughter's really interested in pollinators and bees. She loves bees, and so we've been looking at some 4-H project ideas. And what you're saying about eliminating the headlands, we've actually looked into just going down to like 30 or 40 foot around the borders of organic fields. You eliminate the whole problem of segregating off the border row grain and all that stuff. Planting pollinator species around your fields to help with the insecticide issues or insect issues. There's a lot of benefit there, and the pollinators are great for that. So it's definitely something to look at, and that's something we're working on, and possibly creating a 4-H project for my daughter out of that. So it'll be kind of fun to see where this goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Dudla puts in the chat, plant prairie on the headlands and rent to GOV. I guess I'm not sure, Mark, what GOV is. You can unmute Mark if you want to and talk a little bit more. I know you do a lot of innovation with prairie plantings too.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
the government. Sorry.
Just
Oh,
looking.
GOV is government. Gotcha. Okay. I didn't know that was an acronym.
Um, yeah, they have CSP, and there's a lot of different programs. Just check in with your local area. We really like that. We like breaking it up. We like the diversity. If everybody would do this across the country, we would have connected pollinator habitat, and we could make a major difference. Most of our erosion when we're going up and downhill is the wrong way on the headlands. So I really like to get rid of them, but I also use it as a buffer too, to window frame our fields from pesticides. So we're kind of, in an ocean of that here. So it's really nice to have 40 feet. We just run 40 feet equipment, and then get away from it. That's what we do. And we're running, tracks and tram lines. So that works very, very well. But I'd urge people to do that. There is some management, but again, I think the weed burner comes into play to burn off those headlands and things once you get them established in prairie. And you did a nice segment on that last year, Aaron, that I think people could maybe look to, and see if that's something they want to do.
To make sure that's posted, and I think you were involved in that one. And I'm gonna put you on the spot, Mark, if you can unmute again, since you're already muted. But if you've had experience with the weed zapper, I don't know if you're willing to talk a little bit about how you've used it and what you've seen with weed zapping on your fields.
I agree with everything that was said. I guess it's a love-hate relationship. You lost the war early, allows you to clean up. It's fairly nice for us, giant ragweed, getting a control on that, and whether it's wheat fields, soybean fields, things of that nature. We might actually have sunflower problems in our soybean fields this year too. So we're thinking that maybe it would be good there. It's not an option for corn. If you got giant ragweed pressure in your corn, you're in trouble. That's also hard to flame out too, depending on, how much carbohydrate reserve that giant ragweed has before you start flaming it. So, but it definitely has a place. We're trying to get some traction with Ben from Old School. So if some of you guys would like to see your fields look like a Roundup field, urge Ben to put a sickle behind the copper bar farther back, so we can, as those weeds go underneath that copper bar and they fling back, let's cut them off and get rid of that. So that's one thing that if people could tell Ben that's an option they want, I'm sure he'd do it. But so far I haven't been able to get him to do it. But like the weed zapper, I'm glad it's a tool. It's not cheap. Yeah, you can spend your summers. I agree with everything that's been said so far. It's just one of many in the toolbox. And unfortunately, you have to have everything sitting in the shed ready. And that's some of the challenge. It's not inexpensive.
Yeah, that's why it's sometimes tough to be trying to contract with some of this equipment, because if it's not there, like we experienced at Arlington this summer, we had to wait a couple weeks from when we were first thinking we wanted to pull the trigger, and by then it was too late. So I guess if you can, maybe if there's more of this equipment that a smaller group of farmers can share, that could work. But it's hard when there's limited equipment across the region to try to get it out there when you need it, unfortunately. Same with roller crimpers and other cover crop termination tools as well. Trying to go in the questions. I know there is a question about weed wiping, and Rusty, you said that you could touch on that a bit.
Yeah, we bought one last year. I was all gung ho. Well, actually, the reason I bought it, we do on our conventional cropping site, I do mostly non-GMOs. And so we were raising non-GMO food grade soybeans that are getting shipped over to China, and they've got, they want the fields clean. And we had some escape issues late season. It was a dry year. Weeds didn't die very well. And so I did a little research. My dad had one of those things years ago, and I remember that was kind of hokey, but it's like, well, it could work. So we actually bought one. I made it so it'd mount in the loader tractor, like same thing that I did with my weed cutter deal. And in the non-GMO world, it worked great. And I got a hold of a company that was Smuckers that was building these things down in Texas or wherever they're building them.
Oregon.
Oregon. Okay. Watched their videos, pretty effective. There was a company that was making a product called Weed Slayer, I think it was called, or something of that nature. Thought that was going to be like a breakthrough thing. Found out, well, most organic certifiers, you have to get approval to use it, and there's a lot of organic organizations state by state, they're just not going to allow it because they're finding traces of glyphosate in that product, it sounds like. So last I checked, not approved, can't use it. Does work, but not going to be able to utilize that. And even like, I think if you want to go out and use like a vinegar or something like that, even through your weed rope wick, I think you have to get approval by your organic certifier or whoever you work with before you can just go out and do that. Maybe I could be told differently if anybody knows. I'm curious because, like I said, I've got one sitting in the shed, and it's all flushed out. I cleaned it thoroughly so I could use it for organics if applicable, but I don't know if we can use it or not.
We actually we're a dealer for Smuckers as well, and we bought ours for organic production, and we were using Weed Slayer. And when whatever happened with that, I don't want to start any conspiracy theories, but we can no longer use Weed Slayer, which was a bummer because it worked really, really well on the organic side. We had some really good successes with it. I am working with Agro Research International. They are on the research farm. We do some research on some other products that they have. And I have been talking to Dominic a little bit about that. They are reformulating, and I'm hoping they have another product out here pretty quick that works as good as Weed Slayer did through those weed wipers. We tried
Keep me in the
running,
loop on that, Dave.
yeah, we tried running vinegar through them. It didn't work on the vinegar side. We tried home plate. There was another product we called, I forget the name of it, but we just everywhere you would touch the plant, it would turn it brown, but it did not. It was not systemic, like the Weed Slayer was. That's what was nice about that Weed Slayer product is it was systemic. It would kill it all the way to the root. So
Yeah,
that's
we were
that's the
hoping to do some
difference.
research this year with Weed Slayer and then found out before the growing season that looked like it wasn't an option. But yeah, that did seem, when I saw it out in people's fields, it did look like it could have been an incredibly effective tool. I just put in the chat too. I just heard about this one the other day. Haven't had a chance to look into it, but this harp herbicide, bioherbicide. Have to look a little bit more into that one. But um, that's another one out there. I know Jeff's put in a lot of. I haven't been able to keep up with your chats, Jeff. A philosophical issue of the idea of input substitution, not the direction to go. Yeah, I mean that's definitely an interesting question. Yeah, I don't know. I guess philosophically, my thought is, and I think most of the successful organic farmers I've worked with, I mean, they definitely, if they're going to be long-term successful organic farmers, they need more of that ecological systems-based approach. But I mean, there's just gonna be curveballs thrown at you, and I think that these backup tools are really, really valuable. I mean, with our field this year was dry weather, and we were trying to use our systems-based approach with stale seed bedding, and that just didn't work. So I think when you look at the trade-offs of using judicious use of inputs as a last resort versus increasing the weed seed bank, certainly they're never going to be the primary tool or shouldn't be the primary tool, but I just hate to see them not considered or not available, because I think, yeah, I mean, it's just, yeah, to have all the tools available, I think is going to be necessary as we continue to just experience a lot of curveballs with respect to weather and new weed species and yeah, different other challenges. And Jeff, I noticed you put in some comments in the chat, and I don't know if anyone wants to talk about this, of the value of extending rotations for weed management, or if, as we've seen, weed populations increase in fields. If anyone has any thoughts of why in organic certain weeds increase, or what could be done differently in hindsight to mitigate some of those increases.
What I've noticed that, when I started this process 8 years ago on the research farm was, as we get more and more into the organics, it seems like our weed pressure almost diminishes, or it gets less and less as we get our soils more balanced. I think there's a lot there's a lot of information out there that we don't know yet about balanced soils, biologicals, all those different products like that if you have a weed problem, most generally you have some sort of soil issue. That's kind of what I've seen, and once we figure out what those weeds are telling us, if we can address the issue in the soil, it helps us eliminate some of our weed problems. And so, as we use more organic products, get away from the glyphosates, get away from the anhydruses, the high salt content fertilizers, our soils become healthier, and then in turn we have less weed pressure. That's something I've kind of seen. Locally around here, guys are fighting water hemp, or water hemp is resistant to all these different chemicals, and yet we don't have any water hemp problems in any of our organic fields. So that tells me that part of the problem is the chemicals that they're putting on the fields might be, I don't want to say promoting weed growth, but they might be hindering some sort of biological or locking up some sort of micronutrient that promotes some of those weeds. So, and with the weed slayer and products like that, like you're saying, that's not something that we want to use. The same with the burners. Like if we can get in and rotary hoe or tine weed and cultivate twice and raise a good bean crop or corn crop, then, we're happy. So kind of like what you hit on there a little bit with, these are all tools that we use, and they're good to have in your back pocket if you need them.
And Rusty, you
Another
said you
thing,
want to touch upon that too, the organic fungicide insecticide application.
yeah, if I can actually share, I can share screen again and show you some cool stuff. But I was gonna kind of expand on what Dave's talking about, and even going into fertility and nitrogen usage. We're just seeing with utilizing manure as our primary source of N and P and K and all the micronutrients that come along with it, especially in our nursery manure. It's phenomenal on the micro side, but we're producing more bushels off of less units of nitrogen credits, and it just keeps, we can just keep turning the dial down, and it's just like this whole natural I don't know, state happening in our fields. The soils are becoming healthier. There's more tilthy, and we're having less compaction layers. There's just so much to it that we're missing on the conventional side of the world. Just when we started 10 years ago, moving away from GMO crops and moving into non-GMOs, I could run side-by-side yield results almost with GMO corn versus not spraying glyphosate. And there's just, glyphosate's doing something that isn't cool, and I can't quite put my finger on it. I don't understand the science behind it, something to do with the salts or something, but there's just a lot of benefits there. But we work with I was going to touch on the fungicide, insecticide. I like playing that, especially I've always seen yield benefits in spraying fungicide on corn, and so it was one thing when I went into organics, like I still want to be able to, we've got a lot of leaf disease issues and stuff like that in our area due to climate, and still want to be able to control that. So I did a lot of research for like companies like FBN. They've got products they offer that you can get through them. They're available lots of other places too. But so we did some side-by-sides this year again, and saw some decent results actually just by putting on some applications of fungicide here. And are you able to see this other screen?
Yep.
Oh, that's mine the wrong. Is that, are you seeing the John Deere map page?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. So this is just one of this field on the left side. This was an 80 of corn. There's a hog site down here. We pumped on, I do umbilical application of manure. We put on 5,000 gallons of the acre in a fall applied going into oat stubble that went into corn. And we actually, we harvested the oats, and then we did some tiling in the summer and went back in and reseeded a cover crop. And then we ripped the cover crop in, and pretty much in December there when it was starting to freeze. So I wanted to keep that on there as long as possible. And we went in and did some strip tests, and for some reason it's not showing up straight north of the west end of the hog barns, there was a strip here too, and it didn't come up in the map for some reason. And then if you look right here, there's a strip of fungicide here that's 120 feet wide. Then I had 240 feet right here. And I want to say it was about a 12 bushel push to apply the fungicide. We used Hyganic insecticide and Regalia RX fungicide at the full rate. And we were seeing about a 10 to 12 bushel yield advantage. Like that. So it is approved. It's a good product and it is effective. The neat thing about insecticides are leave out all the extra stuff. I mean, you get down to the root side, it's the it's a derivative of pyrethroid, so it is an organic product that's effective. So there is some benefit there. I don't suggest using it all the time, but if you have issues, it can work and it can control problems. So it's kind of fun to see some of that when you can actually look at a yield map. So it was a good field overall. We had, like I said, I 5,000 gallons manure. I think we were at 34 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 gallon. We got a 231 bushel yield average off of that 80. So we were pretty impressed with that yield. So that was kind of a fun one to see.
Yeah, that's great. So Bruce had a question in the chat earlier, back to the soybean discussion, if anyone's tried using and this, I think, Rusty on kind of similar to, there was a kind of a similar question on the Facebook page that I think you started, which is an awesome forum for farmers to ask questions, organic farmers to ask questions about sowing a early cover crop of oats as a green manure ahead of beans. That other question was more related to what are the options of doing something similar before corn. But if anyone's tried that and if that helps with weed control.
We did that this year, or this last year. It kind of bit us pretty good. What happened, we planted oats late, and then when they were, a foot tall, our plan was to work in and plant right behind them the same day. You want to make sure and plant that same day directly behind your disc or however you're working them in. So you're not burning your germ up in your seed. But it come in, and here locally it rained pretty much the whole month of May. So our oats went from 6 inches tall to 3 foot tall, and now we had a problem. We went ahead and we disc them in and we fought them and got them worked in and planted corn into those. We did have a nitrogen problem with our corn there. We used a product Blue In. I think it made a huge difference on the corn. But weed control was amazing on that corn. And we also used some other oats like that we tilled in front of beans. And we had really good weed control in our bean crop also. It helped tremendously, weed control in beans.
So you're saying the key is more that you want to work those in when they're about a foot tall, and if they get too big, it's...
Right, you want them in that leafy stage. I forget what they call it, but if you can get them worked in, they make really good green manure. I forget the guy's name. I think he's a Mennonite guy in Indiana somewhere. He was at a conference, at the MOA conference, Missouri Organic Conference, talking one year, and they produced like 60 or 70 pounds of nitrogen off of oats, tilling them in as green manure, and had really good success with it. That's where I kind of came up with the idea, and that's what we were trying. And this year it bit us pretty good, but it's something that we're going to continue to try in the future.
Bruce, we put in about flail mowing if they get too tall. I think part of the issue, I mean, even if you flail mow them, is if they get too big, you're going to have a higher seed to end ratio, and that end will be available at some point, but unfortunately, it's probably going to be locked up until a little bit later in the season. So even with flail mowing, it would make it easier to manage potentially, but still could cause some of those issues that Dave was just saying of that nitrogen tying up. Which maybe with soybeans wouldn't be as much of an issue, but with corn.
We had such a good stand of oats. We contemplated leaving them and combining them, but we were afraid if we cut all that stuff loose from the ground that we would never get it to hold still long enough to turn over. So, if it's attached to the ground, you can disc it a lot easier or however you need to work the ground. But that was kind of our thought behind that. That's why we did not mow them.
But Dave, do you think burning them off in the spring and planting into it, would that not be effective then?
It could possibly be, but you're going to have to, well, like you said, it's going to be timing, figuring out when you're going to kill the oats. And I don't know if it'll be, I'm not real sure where the growing point is on the oats. It may be when it's putting its head out or the stem out, putting that stem out and you're almost too late. Then you're going to get into a nitrogen loss problem. So it'd be interesting to see. I think on soybeans, if you wanted to try to no-till some beans into, an oat crop like that, that might be something interesting to look at where you're not too worried about your nitrogen loss.
Yeah.
And that might give you enough cover. And we actually had a guy over an hour from us or something. They actually no-till drilled 7.5-inch spacing soybeans into oats like that. And then they came back, I think they tine weeded maybe, and then they just used their weed zapper, weed zapped them. Had some really good beans. It's something they'll probably do again, but he said he wasn't too impressed with it, with how it worked. But
And there's another, just I think Aaron's point here in the chat, best backup tool in the market is a field cultivator. Replanting is usually the best alternative to a problem field. I think that's a great point. Just not getting locked up into like just always being flexible to go to an alternative plan and thinking of thinking of maybe the longer term impacts. It's definitely replanting can be a valuable option.
I'll
And then
touch on that real
sure,
briefly.
yeah.
We did that. Here's why. So the first time we planted, we had a small field, 20 acres, and it just turned into a disaster. And just timing was off, and it got a lot of rain. The weeds came up before the corn did. It got a flush. It was really a bad situation. And we tore up about half of it and left the other half. And here's the thing. It was almost like getting replant from your crop insurance, because if you can't find organic seed, you don't have to use organic seed. You can go plant your regular non-GMO untreated seed corn from, go plant 0157 Pioneer or one of those proven awesome numbers, and where we tore it up and replanted, and 0157 non-treated, you do that for about 60-70 bucks an acre. More than paid for the extra seed cost, because it was night and day difference. There was no corn on the other side. It just didn't work. So tear it up, replant it.
Huh. I think that's a great point. And I know we're coming up to time, but I was curious too, Seneca. You talked about the Blue N product, similar to the herbicide. We were going to do some Blue N trials, but heard that there was some issue with the product, the company that was selling the product being sold, and the availability. So it surprised Dave that you were able to get it, because I heard there were some issues with availability. But it looks like Seneca, that if you're talking about it for in season end, then it's maybe available again. But yeah, Dave, maybe a little bit more your experiences with Blue N.
With Blue N, like I said, we used it on that oat where we're trying to till in the oats for green manure, and it really shined there, along with any sort of input you put in. If your worst soils are going to respond better, and I think we went from probably 50 bushel corn to 100 bushel corn. They claim it'll give you 60% of your corn nitrogen needs. Pretty skeptical of that, but where we did use it, we saw some increases. I don't have any yield data. It's something we tried personally at home. We didn't do it on the research farm, but we are seeing benefit to that. Seeing almost more benefit to the soybean side, using the Blue N on the soybeans. Because soybeans do take nitrogen. It's just, and with this Blue N product, it's a biological that lives on the plant leaf. And it gives the plant nitrogen when it needs it, is their big selling point, I think, or one of their selling points. And that's always beneficial, and that's where I think it's really going to shine. Where we get it, we have a local guy that was a dealer with that company, and then they sold the rights to Syngenta or whoever they sold the
Yeah,
rights to.
yeah.
And so they are supposed to be coming out with a labeled product. I haven't heard any news as far as, I don't think they have anything on the market yet, and I don't know what price is going to be. They were saying maybe it was 40% of your core nitrogen needs, and it was like $18 an acre. I thought, well, that's kind of a no-brainer there. But so we'll see. I went ahead and I've got a bunch that's actually still labeled blue in. I've got enough for all our acres next year, but we'll see in 2023 if they come out with something and what the price is. Hopefully they don't price it to where it's not feasible to use anymore.
Well, we're at 1:30, and I want to give Dave and Rusty a last chance to, if there's something that you want to share that hasn't been shared yet.
I was just reading through the comments here. I see Jeff made a comment as an economist. The drive to be singly oriented yield is an issue. I'm a numbers guy. I look at the cost and benefit of everything, and we try. Like I said, I wouldn't suggest things like that on every acre, but it's nice to know if it works. If you're seeing a problem, that's why we look at that. Of course, ultimately your yield is, it's the nature of a farmer. You want to raise a crop, but there's also a benefit to idling acres and utilizing cover crops and taking things out of production if necessary. So it's just a cost benefit thing. And no, I totally respect his comment and appreciate his comment there. So I do get what he's saying.
Dave, any last thoughts?
Don't get discouraged. There's always next year. If you have problems, and like I said, if anybody has any questions, you can reach out to me. I think if you post my email on here, even my phone number, I don't care.
Yep, I got the email in the chat.
Yeah, good luck. And like I said, if I can answer any questions, I'd love to, on burners or anything else we've talked about today. Yeah, good luck.
I was just gonna add my my Facebook page in here if I remember what it's actually called.
Yeah, it's an awesome Facebook page. I'm glad you guys let me in as a non-farmer, because
I'm gonna type it into the comments here. It's the Modern Row Crop Organic Producers, and just when you if you want to if you're on Facebook or on social media and you want to jump onto this group, just search it. And but please, I'm very selective about who I let into the group. If you don't answer the questions, I don't care if you're not an organic producer, but please answer the questions and tell me that you are interested, because we get so many of those. Facebook is funny. You get a lot of trollers and stuff like that. And I'm even having trouble with guys that are anti-organic production, and they get on there and they just try to bash everything we're doing. Not that I don't mind the criticism, but I also don't want to deal with the BS that goes along with it, and it starts fights and stuff like that. So, but please, if you want to get on there, it's a great group. It's a great network of people that are really trying to do a good job and try different ideas, and we love to have other people join it. So, love to see you on there.
Great discussion and advice on there. Well, thank you both. These guys, I just asked them both this week to do this, so they did it on short notice, and I'm so appreciative. It was a great discussion, and as always, it's always great to have other comments and feedback and questions in the chat as well. So, well, next workshop is in 2 weeks, and hope to see a lot of you then. And yeah, Happy New Year to everyone, and have a great weekend.
Well, thank you for the invite, Aaron.
Bye.
Thank you, Aaron.